Right now, somewhere, a man just lost his job. Not tomorrow, not next week, right now. And the terrifying part isn't that the paycheck stopped. It's that his life didn't change at all. Same alarm, same habits, same fear hiding under the surface, pretending everything is fine. That's the moment this video is for. Because if your life collapses the second money disappears, you were never free to begin with. Let me say something uncomfortable. If your income vanished tonight, the world wouldn't panic. You would. And panic is expensive. Most men think wealth is about money. It's not. Money is the receipt. Power is the product. Here's the secret nobody explains clearly. The system doesn't reward effort. It rewards predictability that can be controlled, or unpredictability that can't be ignored. And almost everyone chooses the first without realizing it. You wake up when told. You commute when told. You speak carefully. You suppress questions. You trade certainty for safety. And then you wonder why your ceiling never moves. This isn't an accident. It's design. 500 years ago, a man looked at this exact pattern and wrote the truth most people still refuse to face. He wasn't talking about kings and castles. He was talking about human behavior under pressure, about fear, about leverage, about how men give away their power one reasonable decision at a time. His name still makes people uncomfortable, because he didn't believe in fairness. He believed in reality, and reality is cold. Here's the first brutal truth of money, the one schools won't touch. If your next move can be predicted, your value can be capped. Think about that. If your boss knows you'll stay quiet, if the market knows you'll accept less, if society knows you'll complain but comply, then your future is already priced, not by talent, not by intelligence, by obedience. Most men aren't broke because they lack ability. They're broke because they live inside a script written by other people, and scripts are cheap. Now here's where this gets dangerous, in a good way. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Machiavelli understood something that still terrifies institutions today. Power does not respond to hope. It responds to certainty and pressure. He knew that men who wait for permission never get it, that men who try to be liked are always managed, and that the fastest way to lose leverage is to appear harmless. This is where most motivational content lies to you. It tells you to be patient, to trust the process, to wait your turn. But Machiavelli would have laughed at that. He knew patience is only virtuous when you already hold leverage. Otherwise, it's just delayed submission. Let me ask you something uncomfortable again. When was the last time your decision made someone powerful nervous? Not impressed, not amused, nervous. Because money follows nervousness. It follows disruption. It follows men who refuse to be easily categorized. And here's the part nobody wants to admit out loud. Freedom requires a phase where you are misunderstood, judged, misinterpreted, and quietly resisted. Most men turn back right there. They feel the friction and call it a sign to stop. They feel fear and label it irresponsibility. But Machiavelli knew something else. Fear doesn't mean danger. Fear means you're stepping outside the cage. This video isn't about becoming ruthless. It's about becoming unmanageable. Unmanageable by low expectations. Unmanageable by outdated rules. Unmanageable by people who benefit from your silence. And here's the cliff you're standing at right now. Once you understand this game, you have two options. Go back to comfort, or step into uncertainty with intention. In the next part, I'll show you the first Machiavellian shift that separates men who struggle forever from men who quietly escape the system, and why it feels wrong before it feels powerful. Right now, somewhere, a man just lost his job. Not tomorrow, not next week, right now. And the terrifying part isn't that the paycheck stopped. It's that his life didn't change at all. Same alarm, same habits, same fear hiding under the surface, pretending everything is fine. That's the moment this video is for. Because if your life collapses the second money disappears, you were never free to begin with. Let me say something uncomfortable. If your income vanished tonight, the world wouldn't panic. You would. And panic is expensive. Most men think wealth is about money. It's not. Money is the receipt. Power is the product. Here's the secret nobody explains clearly. The system doesn't reward effort. It rewards predictability that can be controlled, or unpredictability that can't be ignored. And almost everyone chooses the first without realizing it. You wake up when told. You commute when told. You speak carefully, you suppress questions, you trade certainty for safety, and then you wonder why your ceiling never moves. This isn't an accident, it's design. 500 years ago, a man looked at this exact pattern and wrote the truth most people still refuse to face. He wasn't talking about kings and castles. He was talking about human behavior under pressure, about fear, about leverage, about how men give away their power one reasonable decision at a time. His name still makes people uncomfortable, because he didn't believe in fairness, he believed in reality, and reality is cold. Here's the first brutal truth of money, the one schools won't touch. If your next move can be predicted, your value can be capped. Think about that. If your boss knows you'll stay quiet, if the market knows you'll accept less, if society knows you'll complain but comply, then your future is already priced. Not by talent, not by intelligence, by obedience. Most men aren't broke because they lack ability. They're broke because they live inside a script written by other people. And scripts are cheap. Now here's where this gets dangerous, in a good way. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Machiavelli understood something that still terrifies institutions today. Power does not respond to hope. It responds to certainty and pressure. He knew that men who wait for permission never get it, that men who try to be liked are always managed, and that the fastest way to lose leverage is to appear harmless. This is where most motivational content lies to you. It tells you to be patient, to trust the process, to wait your turn. But Machiavelli would have laughed at that. He knew patience is only virtuous when you already hold leverage. Otherwise, it's just delayed submission. Let me ask you something uncomfortable again. When was the last time your decision made someone powerful nervous? Not impressed, not amused, nervous. Because money follows nervousness. It follows disruption. It follows men who refuse to be easily categorized. And here's the part nobody wants to admit out loud. Freedom requires a phase where you are misunderstood, judged, misinterpreted, and quietly resisted. Most men turn back right there. They feel the friction and call it a sign to stop. They feel fear and label it irresponsibility. But Machiavelli knew something else. Fear doesn't mean danger. Fear means you're stepping outside the cage. This video isn't about becoming ruthless. It's about becoming unmanageable. Unmanageable by low expectations. Unmanageable by outdated rules. Unmanageable by people who benefit from your silence. And here's the cliff you're standing at right now. Once you understand this game, you have two options. Go back to comfort, or step into uncertainty with intention. In the next part, I'll show you the first Machiavellian shift that separates men who struggle forever from men who quietly escape the system, and why it feels wrong before it feels powerful. The fastest way to stay broke is to be liked by everyone. That sounds harsh, but it's one of the oldest truths about power. Approval feels warm, comforting, safe, and that's exactly why it's dangerous. Machiavelli understood something most men never learn until it's too late. The desire to be liked is not kindness. It's fear wearing a mask, fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of standing alone. And fear is predictable. Predictable men are easy to manage. Look closely at the men who never seem to rise. They're dependable, polite, always available. They smooth conflict. They compromise early. They explain themselves endlessly. And in doing so, they train the world how to treat them. Machiavelli warned about this centuries ago, not because he hated relationships, but because he saw how perception shapes reality. Here's the uncomfortable truth. People don't reward generosity. They reward clarity. If they know where you stand, they adapt. If they know you'll bend, they push. This is why men who try to please everyone often end up invisible, because invisibility is the price of universal acceptance. Now here's where this gets subtle. Machiavelli didn't argue that a man should be hated. He argued that a man should be respected without negotiation. There's a difference. Being liked is emotional. Being respected is structural. Likes can disappear overnight. Respect endures because it's tied to consequence. Ask yourself this honestly. When you say no, does it carry weight? Or does it trigger persuasion? If people feel comfortable arguing your boundaries, you don't have boundaries. You have suggestions. This is where wealth psychology quietly enters the picture. Money flows toward men who can withstand tension. Deals are made in moments of discomfort. Opportunities appear where others hesitate. and the man desperate to be liked avoids all of it. Machiavelli saw that perception was a form of currency. He wrote that it's better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Most people misunderstand this. They think it means cruelty. It doesn't. It means predictable consequence. Fear, in this sense, is simply the knowledge that crossing you has a cost, and cost creates order. Without it, chaos eats your time, your energy, and your money. Now think about modern life, negotiations, workplace dynamics, business partnerships. Who gets taken seriously? The man who over-explains, or the man who states terms and waits? Silence, when backed by leverage, is louder than any argument. Here's the trap most men fall into. They think assertiveness will cost them relationships. But Machiavelli would argue the opposite. Weakness attracts opportunists, not loyalty. The men who stay poor longest often have the largest social circles. Everyone needs them. Few respect them. And respect, not popularity, is what compounds. This is where internal resistance shows up. You start worrying, what if they think I'm arrogant? What if they leave? What if I'm wrong? Machiavelli had a brutal answer for that too. Those who leave because you gained strength were never aligned with your freedom. They were aligned with your availability. This is the psychological cost of growth. Your old identity must become inconvenient. And inconvenience is the doorway to power. In the next part, I'll show you how Machiavelli approached risk, and why the men who avoid risk end up living the most dangerous lives of all. This is where comfort turns into a silent prison. The man who avoids risk feels safe, right up until the moment everything collapses. That's the lie comfort tells you. Machiavelli understood risk differently than most men ever will. He didn't see risk as something to avoid. He saw it as something to choose. Because there are two kinds of danger in life: the danger you see and the danger you postpone. One hits fast, the other rots you slowly. Most men are trained to fear visible risk, quitting a job, starting something uncertain, saying no to authority. But they ignore the invisible risks: stagnation, dependency, becoming obsolete. Machiavelli warned that stability without power is an illusion, because stability belongs to those who control outcomes, not those who obey them. Think about this. A man who never risks confrontation lives in constant tension. A man who never risks failure lives inside quiet desperation. And desperation is far more dangerous than uncertainty. Here's the paradox Machiavelli understood centuries ago. Short-term risk reduces long-term fear. The men who step forward early face resistance once. The men who wait face it forever. Every system eventually tests your usefulness. Every institution updates its needs. And when it does, predictability becomes a liability. This is why safe men panic during change. They built their identity around a stable environment. And environments don't stay stable. Machiavelli observed this pattern in politics, war, and leadership. But the same logic applies to wealth. The men who rise don't eliminate risk. They reallocate it. They choose uncertainty on their own terms instead of absorbing it when someone else decides. This is the moment most men rationalize inaction. They say, now isn't the right time. I need more information. I'll wait until I'm ready. Machiavelli would call that self-deception, because readiness is rarely real. It's a story you tell yourself to avoid discomfort, and the cost of waiting compounds. Look at any industry shift, any economic downturn, any technological leap. Who survives? Not the most loyal, not the hardest working, the adaptable. Adaptability requires exposure, and exposure requires risk. Here's the part that feels counterintuitive. When you take calculated risks early, you gain emotional immunity. Failure stops being catastrophic. Loss becomes instructive. But the man who avoids risk entirely experiences his first loss as a collapse. That's why some men break under pressure while others grow calmer. Machiavelli believed fortune favors those who act boldly, not recklessly, but decisively. Indecision, he knew, signals weakness to the world, and weakness attracts pressure. Now this is where wealth quietly changes hands. During moments of uncertainty, most men freeze. The few who move, who prepared psychologically for risk, acquire assets, positions, and leverage at a discount. This is why crises make some men rich, not because they caused them, but because they were ready to act. If this makes you uncomfortable, good. Discomfort is the early signal of independence. In the next part, I'll show you the Machiavellian principle of timing and why acting too late is often worse than acting imperfectly. This is where hesitation becomes the real enemy. There is a moment when action creates power, and a moment when the same action destroys it. Most men miss the difference. Machiavelli believed timing mattered more than morality, more than effort, and sometimes even more than intelligence. Because power isn't just what you do, it's when you do it. The world does not reward late courage, it rewards initiative. This is where hesitation quietly ruins lives. Most men feel opportunity only after it's obvious, when the path is clear, when others have already validated it. By then, the advantage is gone. Machiavelli observed that men who wait for certainty inherit leftovers, while men who act under uncertainty shape outcomes. Think about every major shift you've witnessed. New industries, market crashes, technological revolutions. Early movers were called foolish, late movers were called responsible. Only one group ended up in control. This is the cost of needing reassurance. By the time the crowd agrees, the leverage has evaporated. Here's the psychological trap. Men confuse patience with delay. Patience is strategic, waiting with leverage. Delay is fear, dressed as wisdom. Machiavelli warned against this confusion. He knew fortune behaves like a river. When it's calm, men underestimate it. When it floods, they regret not preparing. Preparation is not waiting. Preparation is positioning yourself before the surge. This is where wealth strategy becomes uncomfortable, because it forces you to act without applause. The men who win early absorb criticism first. They look wrong before they look smart. Most men can't tolerate that phase. They need external validation to move. But Machiavelli understood something critical. Approval arrives after success, never before. So he acted when resistance was highest, when uncertainty was thick, when others were still debating. This is why timing is power. If you act too early without preparation, you burn credibility. If you act too late, you burn opportunity. The balance is awareness. You don't wait for consensus. You wait for asymmetry, a moment where risk is manageable, but upside is disproportionate. Most men don't see asymmetry because they're focused on comfort. They ask, what's the safest move? Instead of, what's the smartest move right now? Safety optimizes for survival. Timing optimizes for expansion. And wealth requires expansion. Here's the harsh truth Machiavelli would deliver without apology. Men who hesitate long enough are eventually forced to act, but without choice. At that point, timing is no longer theirs. This is why so many men feel trapped. They waited too long to move freely. Now they move under pressure, and pressure strips leverage. In the next part, I'll show you how Machiavelli approached loyalty, and why misplaced loyalty is one of the most expensive mistakes a man can make on his path to wealth. This is where emotional attachments quietly drain power. Loyalty feels noble until it costs you your future. This is where most men sabotage themselves without ever realizing it. Machiavelli never dismissed loyalty. He warned against blind loyalty, because loyalty without leverage is just obedience with a prettier name. Most men are loyal to the wrong things, to companies that would replace them in a week, to people who benefit from their consistency, to identities that no longer serve them. And they call it character. Machiavelli would call it miscalculation. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The world does not reward loyalty. It rewards alignment of interest. When interests align, loyalty appears natural. When they don't, loyalty becomes a liability. This is why men who are too loyal often end up stuck. They stay in rooms that have stopped expanding. They defend systems that quietly limit them. They protect people who would never take the same risk for them. And over time, resentment replaces purpose. Machiavelli saw this pattern repeatedly. Men stayed faithful to rulers who no longer needed them, to institutions that had already outgrown them. And when those institutions collapsed, the loyal fell first, because loyalty is never remembered when power shifts. This is where modern men struggle emotionally. They confuse loyalty with morality. They fear that choosing themselves makes them selfish. But Machiavelli understood something most men avoid admitting. You cannot build power by sacrificing yourself to those who gain from your weakness. True loyalty flows upward, not outward. It begins with loyalty to your long-term position. If staying loyal makes you smaller, it's not loyalty, it's erosion. This doesn't mean betrayal. It means discernment, knowing when alignment has ended, knowing when growth requires distance, knowing when staying costs more than leaving. Most men feel this moment internally long before they act. They feel the stagnation, the frustration, the quiet sense that they've outgrown the room, but they suppress it. He would ask a single question: does this opposition matter? If the enemy lacks leverage, ignore them. If they have leverage, neutralize them, calmly and decisively. This is not about cruelty. It's about containment. Unaddressed opposition grows. Addressed opposition dissolves. The worst mistake is half measures, being too soft to end conflict, too aggressive to maintain goodwill. That middle ground is where reputations die. Here's where modern men fail strategically. They try to be both liked and dominant. Machiavelli would call that impossible. You can be respected or comfortable, but rarely both at once. This is why wealth isolates. As your leverage grows, your tolerance for nonsense shrinks, and that shrinkage is misinterpreted as arrogance, but it's actually clarity. The men who build power learn to let go of unnecessary battles. They don't respond to everything. They don't explain themselves to everyone. They reserve force for moments that shape the future. This is where emotional discipline becomes a financial advantage. The man who reacts impulsively loses control of the narrative. The man who responds deliberately controls outcomes. Machiavelli believed it was better to be decisive once than hesitant forever. Enemies respect strength, not apologies. And when handled correctly, enemies can even become allies, not through persuasion but through boundaries. In the next part, I'll show you Machiavelli's most misunderstood idea, the role of force, and why restraint, not aggression, is what actually creates dominance. This is where silence becomes louder than action. The most powerful move is often the one you don't make. That sounds backwards, but Machiavelli understood restraint better than most men understand action. Force is seductive, it feels decisive, it feels strong, and that's why it's dangerous. Machiavelli never glorified constant aggression. He warned against overuse of force because force reveals intent, and revealed intent invites resistance. The truly powerful men don't move often. They move once and everyone remembers it. Most men think dominance means asserting themselves repeatedly, correcting, interrupting, proving. But repetition weakens authority. If you have to remind people who you are, you're already slipping. Machiavelli believed force should be rare, clean, and final, not emotional, not reactive. Why? Because restraint creates uncertainty, and uncertainty creates respect. When people don't know how far you'll go, but know you will go there if necessary, they behave. This is where wealth psychology becomes precise. Markets respect discipline. People respect consistency. Power respects control. The man who lashes out loses narrative control. The man who waits chooses the battlefield. Most men burn leverage by acting too soon. They respond to provocation. They defend against accusations. They explain themselves under pressure. Machiavelli would call that surrender disguised as engagement. Silence, when intentional, forces others to fill the gap. And people reveal themselves in that gap. This is why high-level negotiations often stall deliberately. Why powerful men pause before responding. Why decisions aren't rushed. Time is leverage. The man who can afford to wait usually holds power. The man who can't, doesn't. Here's the discipline most men never develop: the ability to feel urgency without obeying it. Urgency is often manufactured. Deadlines, threats, social pressure. Machiavelli knew that whoever controls the pace controls the outcome, and pace is not about speed, it's about command. This is why restraint looks like confidence from the outside and feels like agony on the inside at first, because it requires emotional mastery. But once you internalize it, something shifts. You stop reacting. You start deciding. And decision is where money follows. In the final part, I'll bring everything together: power, timing, loyalty, perception, enemies, restraint, and show you why getting rich is brutally simple once you stop lying to yourself about how the world actually works. This is the final turn of the knife. The truth was never hidden. It was just uncomfortable. Machiavelli didn't create a new world. He described the one that already existed, without apology, without illusions. And that's why his ideas still disturb people 500 years later. Getting rich is brutally simple, not easy, simple. Because complexity comforts the powerless, it gives them excuses. Simple truths demand action. Here is the pattern you've now seen from every angle. Wealth does not come from effort alone. It comes from leverage. Leverage is built by becoming difficult to replace, acting before consensus forms, withdrawing loyalty when alignment ends, controlling perception without emotional exposure, accepting enemies as proof of movement, using restraint as a signal of dominance. That's it. No secret vaults, no hidden bloodlines, no mystical aim, because walking away feels disloyal. Machiavelli would say this: the only unforgivable mistake is remaining loyal to a future that no longer exists. This is how men lose decades, not in dramatic failures but in quiet compromises. Every year they stay just one more year, every promotion that never comes, every promise that keeps getting delayed, and one day they wake up loyal to a life they never chose. Here's the shift wealthy men make. They don't ask, "Who am I loyal to?" They ask, "What is this relationship building?" If the answer is nothing, they adjust, calmly, strategically, without guilt, because guilt is a tool used by systems that benefit from your hesitation. In the next part, I'll show you the Machiavellian view on morality, and why appearing moral is often more powerful than trying to be morally pure. This is where perception becomes a weapon. The most dangerous men are not immoral, they are convincingly moral. That sentence alone unsettles people, and it should. Machiavelli understood something modern culture avoids. Morality is not just a personal compass. It is a public signal, and signals shape outcomes. He never argued that men should abandon ethics. He argued that appearing virtuous often matters more than being perfectly virtuous. Why? Because the world does not see intentions, it sees behavior, and behavior is interpreted through perception. Most men sabotage themselves by being morally rigid in environments that reward flexibility. They announce their values loudly. They take principled stands prematurely. They reveal their boundaries before they hold leverage. Machiavelli would call this naive exposure. He believed morality without strategy becomes a weapon used against you. Think about it. If people know exactly what you will never do, they know exactly where to push you. Rigid virtue creates predictable weakness. This is why powerful institutions often speak in moral language. They don't always act morally, they appear to. Because appearance calms resistance, and resistance is costly. This is where wealth dynamics quietly operate. Deals aren't blocked by immorality. They're blocked by reputational risk. The man who understands perception can navigate complexity without burning bridges. The man who insists on moral purity often isolates himself before he gains influence. Machiavelli saw this clearly. He believed it was better to be adaptable in private and principled in public than the reverse. Not to deceive for pleasure, but to preserve position. Position gives you options. Options give you power. Here's the trap most men fall into. They confuse transparency with honesty. They say everything they think. They reveal every concern. They expose their internal conflicts, and they call it authenticity. Machiavelli would call it strategic suicide, because authenticity without timing erodes authority. You don't owe everyone access to your internal process. You owe the world clarity and consistency. This is why wealthy men are often misunderstood. They are calm where others panic, measured where others moralize, silent where others perform. They understand that moral theater is expensive, and silence is often safer. This doesn't mean lying. It means selective disclosure. You say what serves the moment. You withhold what creates unnecessary friction. You move ethically, but not emotionally. That distinction matters. Here's the uncomfortable reality. Most people don't punish immorality. They punish instability. Machiavelli knew that appearing controlled was more important than appearing perfect, and control attracts trust. In the next part, I'll show you how Machiavelli thought about enemies, and why avoiding enemies entirely is one of the fastest ways to remain powerless. This is where conflict becomes unavoidable. If no one opposes you, you're not moving anything. That's the part most men misunderstand. They think conflict is failure. Machiavelli knew conflict is evidence. Evidence that you've entered territory that matters. A man without enemies is either invisible or irrelevant. Machiavelli didn't seek enemies for ego. He understood that opposition reveals where power actually sits. Resistance points to value. When you challenge nothing, nothing pushes back. Most men spend their lives avoiding friction. They soften their edges. They retreat at the first sign of disapproval, and in doing so, they signal weakness. Here's the truth Machiavelli wrote plainly. Enemies are inevitable when you change the balance of power. Trying to avoid them doesn't make you safe. It makes you unprepared. The wealthy don't fear enemies, they study them. Because enemies reveal your blind spots. They show you where your influence threatens others. That information is priceless. Most men react emotionally to opposition. They defend, they explain, they try to repair image. Machiavelli would do none of that. Just decisions most men refuse to make. Machiavelli would say this plainly. Men are not oppressed by systems as much as they are protected by them from responsibility. Responsibility is terrifying because it removes excuses. Once you see the game, you can't blame the rules. You can only choose whether to play. Most men don't want freedom. They want comfort with occasional fantasies of escape. Freedom demands confrontation with others and with yourself. It demands that you stop asking, "What will they think?" and start asking, "What happens if I don't act?" This is why wealth looks lonely from the outside, because fewer people are willing to walk the path where outcomes aren't guaranteed. But here's the final Machiavellian truth most people miss. Power is not about domination. It's about optionality, the ability to say no, the ability to wait, the ability to move when others can't. Money is simply the scoreboard. If this video made you uncomfortable, that's a good sign. Comfort rarely precedes transformation. Machiavelli wasn't teaching cruelty, he was teaching clarity, and clarity is the enemy of illusion. The game hasn't changed, only the setting has. The question now isn't whether Machiavelli was right, it's whether you're willing to stop pretending the world works differently. Because once you stop lying to yourself, everything becomes brutally simple.